introduction part of nervous system. So nervous system, we are going to talk about the nerves majorly. So anatomical classification, functional classification we have. So in the anatomical division, this is what we are seeing from the beginning. Okay, nervous system into central nervous system, peripheral nervous system. And central nervous system, you have brain and the spinal cord. And brain, during its development, you have forebrain, midbrain, hindbrain. Forebrain you also call as prosencephalon, mesencephalon, rhombencephalon. And then forebrain further has telencephalon, diencephalon. You have to remember this point. So from which part of the brain, which structure is coming out? Always. This will be in your MCQs. At least one you will get in that. For example, thalamus, basal ganglia, hippocampus, hypothalamus, like that everything. Whether you can easily say forebrain, whether it is telencephalon or diencephalon. Okay? So telencephalon mainly gives to the cerebral cortex and its connecting commissures corpus callosum, basal ganglia, hippocampus. And diencephalon, it gives rise mainly to the deeper structures, the thalamus, hypothalamus, epithalamus, metathalamus and subthalamus. And now moving on to the midbrain. No more confusion with the midbrain. Mesencephalon only for the midbrain. Okay. And now going to the hindbrain, that you call as rhombencephalon. On development, it further gives metencephalon, myelencephalon. Metencephalon gives rise to the posterior structures, cerebellum, pons and pontine tegmentum. Myelencephalon, as the name, it is for medulla. Okay, so this is the organization of the brain in the CNS. And now moving on to the peripheral nervous system. You have somatic nervous system and autonomic nervous system. Somatic nervous system, in the sense it is going to control the body parts. Through the nerves, you call it as cranial nerves or spinal nerves. How many cranial nerves we have? 12. How many spinal? 12 pairs? 12. How many spinal nerves we have? 31 pairs. 31 pairs. Okay. And both are having afferent and efferent functions. And autonomic nervous system, you will further have the subdivisions sympathetic, parasympathetic and enteric nervous system, which is specifically for GIT. And this autonomic nervous system also has its afferent and efferent nerve fibers. Okay, clear? So that is the anatomical division. If you see in the functional division, you will categorize as sensory and motor. Sensory is for the mainly to get the signals from the periphery into the brain. And motor, it will carry the sensory impulse analysis to the motor organs, to the peripheral organs, from the higher center to the periphery. Since these two major functions is being mediated, you classify this as a functional classification. Okay, clear? And moving on to the peripheral nervous system, you have sensory somatic and autonomic nervous system. In the sensory somatic, we have seen 12 pairs of cranial nerves and 31 pairs of spinal nerves. So these are all the cranial nerves, and it was also given whether it is sensory, motor or mixed cranial nerve. So remember this always. Okay, what is the first cranial nerve? Then olfactory, optic, oculomotor, trochlear, trigeminal, abduction, facial, vestibulocochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory, hypoglossous. Is it only accessory, the 11th cranial nerve? Spinal accessory nerve. Okay. And which is mixed, which is sensory, which is purely sensory, which is purely motor? Optic, oculomotor, optic and oculomotor sensory. Then vestibulocochlear is sensory. Then mixed cranial nerve. Vagus, glossopharyngeal, trigeminal. Why descending order? Then what about facial? Mixed cranial nerve. The rest is purely motor. Okay, clear. So sensory nerves. Remember the special sense organs: eyes, ears, smell, nose, olfactory. So all these are the purely sensory. You will not get the optic nerve motor innervation to the eyes. You are not getting the through vestibulocochlear some motor response to your ears. It is just carrying the sensory input. So they are considered to be purely sensory. And remember the sensory, remember the mixed cranial nerve, then the rest is motor. Okay, clear? So this is the cranial nerves. And now coming to the spinal nerves, how it is arranged. So this is the structure of the spinal cord. You all know very well, when you do the cross section, you will get the outer white matter, inner gray matter. So the gray matter, you will have the head-shaped organization of the gray matter, or you also call it as butterfly shape. Okay, so this gray matter will have its piercing of the white matter in either sides. This is for bringing the nerve fiber and to give back the nerve fibers. Okay, so this is the posterior part and this is the anterior part. The white matter you call as posterior white column, and this is the lateral white column, and this is the anterior white column. The same lateralization in gray matter, you will give it as horns. Dorsal horn or posterior horn, lateral horn, and the anterior horn. This dorsal you will also call as sensory, because the nerves are going to enter into the cranial nerve through this dorsal root. So you also call it as sensory. Sensory is entering through which root? Dorsal horn. The sensory is going to enter. So you also call it as a sensory root. And then whatever it may be and from wherever it may be, the anterior horn, through this only the nerve fibers is going to come out of the spinal cord to the peripheral organs. So this is also called as ventral root or motor root. Okay, if there is a defect in this anterior horn cells, then you will not have the sensory signal. You will not have the sensory sensations. If the motor nerves, neurons are affected, then the motor output is defective. Okay, so whatever the defect, if it is in the level of the spinal cord, you call it as lower motor neuron. Okay, now from the spinal cord, it is going to reach the brain. In the brain, we have the neural cells. Okay, and from the brain, you are going to get the signal back, and that signal is coming into the anterior horn cells, and then from the anterior horn cells, it is going to the periphery. If the defect is at the level of the brain, then you term it as upper motor neuron. Okay, so which is upper motor neuron? At the level of the brain, cortical level. If it is at the level of the spinal cord, lower motor neuron. So this is how you will categorize the lesion once when you get the symptoms. Okay, so this is about the spinal division.